Welcome to the Joshua on Goma podcast for spiritual inspiration and Africa's strategy positioning in global politics.
Africa's third way. There's a third way for Africa's economic future that requires a calculated mix of both government and private-run enterprises in a growing free market economy. Africa's current development stage requires that we borrow the best values from all economic systems available to us. Neither a complete nationalization of our economies nor the touting of a neoliberal economic model as the answer to our economic ills has this far served Africa well. Some guiding principles that are pivotal to Africa's third way are the burden and responsibility to develop Africa's economic model that works in our interest squarely rests on us, the Africans, and no one else. The primary drivers in China's economic success story, for instance, are the Chinese themselves, and so are the Indians in India and the Koreans in South Korea, respectively. Africa should not be the exception. It will take us, the Africans, to develop Africa. Through the right technology transfers, we can do most of the work by us. We can still garner the courage to take ownership of our economies and destiny as Africans. Absorption of advanced foreign technologies, embracing massive production of finished goods and services, and then aggressively trading with the rest of the outside world is our sure way out of our poverty. On the most part, we export raw materials and then buy back more expensive finished products with added value. Foreign direct investment can be allowed only in certain areas of the economy, and at the same time grow strategic indigenous companies and businesses until they are established enough to face the vicious competition on the global stage. We need a pragmatic mixture of market incentives and state direction, vanquish the free market, and neither should we have blind faith in it. Free markets work best, but they are not perfect. From time to time, they need moderate but effective regulation through policy interventions. We need a multi-generational vision that every successive government should abide by and reflects an understanding of the complexities of globalization and is sharp enough to keep Africa ahead of the competitive curve. We should also plan beyond our immediate and present need for consumption. Instead, we have to create a strategic blueprint for the success of our nations and continent 50 to 100 years into the future. Investments in research and development, R&D, in Africa's unique challenges and needs should be our cornerstone for success and competitiveness moving forward. Africa's diaspora reverse brain drain is precisely about coping and creating cutting-edge technologies and business models tailored for development back home in Africa. Can socialism and the lack of democracy be cited as the primary cause for some failed states in Africa? Many parallels have been drawn between North Korea and socialist African nations and on the other hand, against South Korea's unprecedented success. The premise of this argument is that North Korea is a communist dictatorship, while South Korea is a capitalist democracy. But China is as communist as North Korea, yet China has emerged as the second largest economy after the United States of America. Ha-Joon Chang, author of Bad Samaritans, writes, "Today, South Korea is one of the world's industrial powerhouses, while North Korea languishes in poverty. Much of this is thanks to the fact that South Korea aggressively traded with the outside world and actively absorbed foreign technologies, while North Korea pursued its doctrine of self-sufficiency. Through trade, South Korea learned about the existence of better technologies and earned the foreign currency that it needed in order to buy them. In the end, economic development is about acquiring and mastering advanced technologies. In theory, a country can develop such technologies on its own, but such a strategy of technological self-sufficiency quickly hits the wall, as seen in the North Korean case. The comparison of South Korea and China's development paths to Africa's is a mere guidepost and not meant to be a copy and paste exercise. Some think that this comparison is overplayed and out of context. However, it was the radical policy steps South Korea undertook, which are true and tested in both post-war and peacetime national building, that we can learn and emulate from. It is these comparative policies, choices, and implementation that made South Korea to dramatically surpass both Ghana and North Korea economies. We should not waste our time to reinvent the wheel. We can take advantage of processes that have proven to work elsewhere and adopt them as our own. Ultimately, we need to find our own unique path of development. Communist China and capitalist South Korea have achieved similar results of economic success by pursuing a common blueprint. They both have absorbed foreign technologies, embraced massive production of finished goods and services, and then aggressively trading with the rest of the world out there. On the most part, Africa exports raw materials and then buys back more expensive finished products with added value. Should it not be that Africa's most pressing need to get out of poverty is dependent on acquiring a modern and high standard of education, importation, innovation, and imitation of cutting-edge technologies, production of finished goods and services, and trade within Africa first and with the rest of the world second? Contrary to common belief, South Korea's economic success was not as a result of an immediate and drastic opening up to unlimited competitive free markets. The government was involved in the running of certain businesses and did not allow for unbridled deregulation, privatization, and the complete opening up of the economy to international trade and investment. It was a calculated mix of both government and private-run enterprises in a growing free market. Could this be the right prescription for most African economies? If there is a single most important lesson to be learned from the South Korean economic model of success, is that the government played an activist role. The government and its people determined the vision, priorities, and pace of development for themselves as Koreans. They only allow foreign direct investment, FDI, in certain areas of the economy, and they grow their strategic indigenous companies and businesses until they are established enough to face the vicious competition on the global stage. South Korea's economic success has been best described as if the impoverished nation of Haiti becomes a Switzerland. How then did South Korea achieve its economic success? Korea was under Japanese occupation from 1910 to 1945, and was divided into North and South Korea in 1948. In 1950, the Korean War between the North and the South broke out, and it's believed to have been one of the world's bloodiest conflicts that claimed 4 million lives in just 3 years. It is estimated that half of South Korean manufacturing base and 3/4 of its railway network were destroyed in the conflict. By 1961, 8 years after the conflict, an average South Korean earned 81 United States dollars as gross domestic product per capita, while that of newly independent Ghana was at $179. A legitimate comparison can be made between the policy steps that South Korea took after the bloody 1950 Korean War, and that claimed 4 million lives in just 3 years, and those of Ghana, the first African independent state, during the same period in 1957. It is estimated that half of South Korean manufacturing base and 3/4 of its railway network were destroyed in the conflict. Even in its devastated condition after the war, South Korea undoubtedly had a more established economic base than Ghana at independence. But Ghana had abundant natural resources to work with. Similarly, North Korea, with mineral resources and an industrial base, was regarded as the stronger power on the peninsula than its southern neighbor. Kwame Nkrumah had grand ideas for Ghana and Africa, known as Nkrumah-ism, which states, independent and absolutely free from imperialism, organized on a continental scale, founded upon the conception of one and united Africa, drawing its strength from modern science and technology, and from the traditional African belief that the freedom and development of each is conditioned by the free development of all. By comparison, South Korea went big and Ghana did not. Ghana did not back up its economic wishes with hardline policy steps, but South Korea did, making it an economic model for many third world countries that were looking to build their economies from almost the scratch. The country's main exports were tungsten ore, fish, and wigs made out of human hair. In 1961, General Park Chung-hee came into power through a military coup, and he was to consolidate political power around him until October of 1979, when he was assassinated. In 1972, he imposed martial law. It was under General Park's leadership that South Korea embarked on an ambitious government-driven industrialization program. In 1965, General Park normalized diplomatic relations with Japan, its former colonial master, bringing in with it $800 million as economic aid. General Park also agreed to send 2 Korean divisions to fight alongside the United States forces in Vietnam, for which Korea was highly rewarded by the United States. These revenues from the Vietnam War became the largest single source of foreign exchange earnings for South Korea in the mid 1960s. These funds helped launch the country's transformation over the next 2 decades from a per capita income in South Korea of less than $100 per year to a world leader in iron and steel production, shipbuilding, chemicals, and consumer electronics. The Republic of South Korea's per capita income increased tenfold during Park's tenure. In 1973, General Park launched an ambitious heavy chemical industry program in which the first steel mill, a modern shipyard, and a locally designed cars assembled mainly with imported parts were produced. Other new advanced firms were set up in fields like electronics, and South Korea's gross domestic product increased fivefold. In 1972, per capita income was $319 and that of Ghana $250. By 1979, it had increased to 1,600, while that of Ghana had only increased to $380. During the same period, South Korea's total exports grew even faster from $1.7 billion to $15.1 billion. Samsung, the electronic giant and leading exporter of computers, semiconductors, and mobile phones, started out as an exporter of fish, vegetables, and fruit in 1938. Up until 1970, its major line of business was in sugar refining and textiles. It was only in 1974 that Samsung moved into the semiconductor industry after procuring 50% stake in Korea Semiconductors, and its first color television did not come until 1977. During this period of industrialization, the government placed a freeze on foreign exchange currency on its citizens. The buying of luxury imports like cigarettes and chocolates were prohibited, citing the fact that the country needed every bit of the foreign currency for the importation of machines and other imports to develop better industries. Violation of foreign exchange rules was punishable. The government also enforced high tariffs, excise taxes, and an outright ban on certain imports. It is only in the year 2010, for instance, that a new trade agreement was ratified by the United States, in which South Korea reduced its tariffs on United States auto imports from 8% to 4%. Since the United States had a lower tariff rate than South Korea, the latter has had more access to the United States automobile market with its brands like Hyundai and Kia. With this trade agreement, the United States can now increase its share of automobile sales in the South Korean market. Up until the mid-1980s, South Korea was not sophisticated enough to own its ideas and technological blueprints. Going against intellectual property rights, the country became known as one of the pirate capitals of the world. Its lax attitude towards foreign patents meant that the government overlooked the production of huge quantities of counterfeit goods for sales, like high-end fashion shoes, sneakers, and ladies' accessories. South Korea is now one of the leading nations in new innovations, ranking among the top 10 nations in annual patent registrations granted by the United States Patent Office. During the early decades of development, South Korea used tariff protection and government subsidies to build up new select industries by absorbing new technologies. These new industries were allowed enough time and a process to build capacities, and after they were strong enough, they were opened up selectively and gradually to international competition. The government owned all the banks so that it could direct credit flows. State-owned enterprises, SOEs, directly undertook the running of big projects. Where private enterprises were mismanaged, the government often took them over for restructuring, while the possibility of reselling them to the private sector once they were viable again. The government also controlled the flow of foreign investment, openly allowing some in certain sectors and completely prohibiting it in other sectors of the economy. Ha Jun Chang in Bad Samaritans writes again, "The Korean economic miracle was the result of a clever and pragmatic mix of market incentives and state direction. The Korean government did not vanquish the market as the communist states did. However, it did not have blind faith in the free market either. While it took markets seriously, the Korean strategy recognized that they often need to be corrected through policy interventions. Africa cannot relate its vision and program of development purely to foreign investors. They are in it for themselves. The notion that this is the answer to Africa's development and economic ills is grossly misplaced. Africa requires a multi-generational vision. Africa also needs a generational change of leadership that reflects an understanding of the complexities of globalization and is sharp enough to keep Africa ahead of the competitive curve. Investments in research and development, R&D, Africa's unique challenges and needs should be our cornerstone for success and competitiveness. Africa's diaspora's reverse brand drain is precisely about coping and creating cutting-edge technologies tailored for Africa's development. The burden and responsibility to develop Africa squarely rests on the Africans and on no one else. Peace in Africa cannot be defined solely in terms of the absence of war. Poverty and its effects of hunger, sickness, disease, and disposition can be just as debilitating as armed conflict. In 2019, 35% of sub-Saharan Africans were estimated to live in abject poverty and lack some of life's most basic needs like clean drinking water, sanitation, enough food, decent shelter, health, and education facilities. Thank you for watching and listening. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Joshua on Goma podcast. Bye for now until next time.